Story 1. My mom was in the hospital 50 miles away. I was 19. We were pretty sure this was it. I was home alone. My parents' house is big. It's off the beaten path on a small lagoon. My dad had been staying up at the hospital. That night, I went to bed about 1 a.m. I was playing on my laptop. My room was in a separate wing of the house. It can be sealed off with a single locking door. The door was shut, but not locked. I have always been scared of the dark, so I had the lights in my wing on. So was the closet light. As I was messing around on the computer, I saw the lights in my wing turn off. All of them. The band of light under the door went black. I hopped up in bed and stared at it. My bedroom door was unlocked, and I was debating getting up to lock it when the shut door slammed. As in, it sounded like someone straight up kicked the bottom of the door with all their strength. I remember squeaking in shock. It took me about 6 seconds to be up on both feet with a blade about 4 paces back and just right of the door. I remember thinking if the door swung open, I could be on whoever it was almost instantly. I was also silently cursing that there was no light under the door anymore. No way to see the shadow of whoever was out there. Nothing happened. I was fighting off the fear of the situation and stupidly decided that going on offense was all that was left. I didn't have a phone in my room, and my Nokia was in another wing of the house charging. I threw the door open with my knife low and my left hand in a guarded position. There was no one there. I tossed the hallway light switch on. There was no one in my wing. There was no one in the house. The burglar alarm was still on. Confused, I turned on the main house lights and sealed the wing off, locking the door between the main house and my area. I went back to my room and just sat there with my laptop open. My bedroom door now had a slight bow in it. A couple hours passed with me warily lying in bed. Around 3 a.m. the lights under the door went dark. That left me terrified. My knife seemed pretty insignificant, and my previous dumb courage had ran out. I scooted my bed, no easy task, against my bedroom door, grateful the door opened inward. It all felt so wrong, like something was angry with me. I retreated to my closet and waited for the sun to come up. When the skylight in my room got bright, my courage returned and I moved the bed and exited my room. The wing door had been unlocked, which required a key from the other side. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs in the main house and realized my dad was home. I felt a little foolish as obviously he had been responsible for turning the lights off the second time. I led my greeting with, "Oh, so it was you who turned all the lights off?" He looked at me and replied, "What? I got home about 10 minutes ago." I have zero clues of what happened that night, but it never happened before that night or after. Whatever it was, it seemed to like the dark and wasn't a fan of doors. And it seemed to be in my wing of the house. My parents built the house and nothing untoward had ever taken place there. My bedroom door at my parents' house still has a bow in it to this day. This was almost 20 years ago. My mom is still alive, and for that, I'm extremely grateful. Story 2. I went to a college where many areas of the campus were haunted. It was literally built on a pioneer burial ground. There were many stories around there, but the one that I personally experienced was a house that all of our Greek societies shared. I found a box of letters written by sorority members from back in the 1970s and 80s. I opened the box and started reading the letters. Each letter had the goals and dreams of someone. Well, as I was reading this, which I obviously shouldn't have been doing, the room got ice cold. So much so that I could see my breath. I put the box back and rushed back downstairs from the room I was in. Later that month, many of my other fraternity brothers said they had similar experiences. We would see something walk past doorways. If you were just sitting, sometimes you would feel something blowing air up and down parts of your body, like your neck, arm, head, etc. We had a pool table, and one time we got the bright idea to use the pool balls on the table as a makeshift Ouija board to try and communicate with whatever was in the house. It got really weird as balls would fly off the table at us as we were rolling the balls on the table. It's hard to explain without being long-winded. The scariest for me was one time I was in the house watching a movie with a friend. The house was empty aside from us. By that time, I had learned to ignore the air being blown on me, and as long as someone was there with me, I was able to ignore the odd stuff that would go on. But this time, as if to up the ante, a weird gurgling growl started coming up from under the floor. There was no basement, so it was apparently coming from the crawl space. It sounded like a giant cat or dog was stuck in the pipes under the house, but rather than just staying in one place, it would follow me as I walked around. It freaked both of us out so much that we decided to close up and leave. As we did, the sound followed us under the floor. Then, as we walked out into the yard, the sound even followed us out. Under the lawn, and as we ran up the street, it followed under us all the way. It finally stopped, and we went back to our dorm rooms. It was freaky enough that I never really went back to the house. I even skipped the parties that went on there. Throughout our time there, many of our friends and I continued to experience stuff. Shadows on the walls that would talk to you, offering to sell or buy blood, an apparition of a dog eating a baby, silhouettes of us hanging from nooses in the windows. I never saw any of this. I would only hear and feel stuff, so the apparitions never happened to me personally, but to my fraternity brothers who I trusted. The thing about all of it is that if we really wanted to, we could probably chalk it all up to our imagination running away, or coincidence, like that growling sound. Maybe it was an animal or a pipe. I still don't know if it was true paranormal, and I haven't experienced any haunting activity since. But in the moment, I couldn't explain any of it, and I still can't. Story 3. So I was 13, maybe 14 years old, so many moons ago. I always saw things, but I never really wanted to believe. This isn't by far my creepiest story, but it's what made me believe. I was staying with my friend. This would have been in the mid-90s, and after a full day of paintball, we decided we wanted to chill in the recliners and watch movies on HBO. His dad always got up very early in the morning to go to work. We are getting sleepy, and it's late, but instead of taking a chance waking him up by walking past the room, we decide screw it, we are sleeping in the recliners. He was such a light sleeper we didn't want to change the channel because when the satellite dish moved to receive the signal from whatever area, it needed to turn and it made noise. If you were born after the 90s, satellite dishes for TVs were the size of small cars and had to rotate to get a signal, so we just kept watching whatever happened to be on and fell asleep. I wake up suddenly and the TV is off. I look towards the steps to his basement because he had a wall clock over there that lit up, and I remember it being sometime around 5 in the morning. His basement was where they had their kitchen, and I saw a light reflecting off the wall that seemed to be coming up the stairs. I sat up thinking it was his dad about to leave for work, and he was being respectful of us sleeping and was using a small flashlight to see up the stairs. I sat and watched this light slowly come up the stairs, and come to think of it, It really reminded me of what would look like the LED from a cell phone light. However, flashlights on cell phones weren't even a thing then. Cells were just big bricks that only did one thing: make phone calls. So after what seemed like way too long, it looks like it's getting closer to the top step. I'm ready to say hello to his dad when he reached the top. What reaches the top, however, was not his dad. It was a white, glowing human shape. I could tell it was human form, but there was no real mass to this thing, and it was only half of the human shape. So it was a head, shoulders, but no legs and feet. I freaked out like, holy crap, this is not right. There is half a human form slowly floating toward me. I reach across to the other recliner and wake Tim up, absolutely crapping myself. Tim sits up, looks, and has this oh crap look on his face. Then just says, "Okay, that's enough, Casper. Leave us alone." And the thing just disappears. Like from bottom to top, fades out and disappears. Then Tim just looks at me and goes, "Don't worry, that's just Casper. Sometimes he moves things and opens doors. Drove the car one day," and goes back to sleep. I was like, what? Wait, you can't say that crap and then go back to sleep. I sat staring at that doorway, and when his dad did finally get up for work, I almost crapped myself because he came downstairs with a flashlight. It took me a few weeks to get up the nerve to go back over to his house. Story 4. My childhood home didn't just have my grandma, my dog, and I living in it. There were 3 other beings in the house. One was an old man who had died in the house about 40 years earlier. Me and my grandma would hear him walking around sometimes in steel-toe boots, and one time he actually started playing country music from the 50s on a laptop that was closed and powered off. He only ever showed himself a couple of times, but never around me or my grandma, only to an aunt who had been staying in the basement. One day she asked if we had ever seen anything in the house, then told us that she had seen an old man peeking out at her from our laundry room. Apparently, he didn't look like he was evil, just kind of looking around to see who was there. There was a spirit that never really showed itself or said anything, but it would move things to weird places, throw things across rooms, lock doors, and would also slam doors. One day my dog was outside, but I heard something downstairs. Completely forgetting my dog was outside, I called down the stairs as I was worried he was getting into something as per usual. As I called down the stairs into the pitch-black basement, I heard a crystal clear, low growl and kind of just ushered the dog to come upstairs by calling his name. He never came up. I was just going to go downstairs when I heard my dog howling in the front yard. No one was home. No TV was on. Nothing. Safe to say, I waited outside with my dog for my grandma to get home from work that day. Another one was a little girl. No one could ever see her but me. She only ever showed herself a couple of times though. Once, when I was really young, she appeared behind my door, which was wide open. She was kneeling down, crying really hard. Of course, I freaked out, and when my grandma came rushing in, she was no longer there. Another time she showed herself when I was in sleep paralysis. This time I could only slowly move my eyes, which led to me seeing her knelt down in the corner of my room crying. She once sent a picture from my phone of her white forehead and black hair. At the time I had blonde hair and had not sent any picture of my forehead, and no one was home or had access to my social media. Sometimes me and my grandmother would hear her crying around the house, or she would throw some things sometimes. I had a feeling she was traumatized and died at a very young age due to the way she had literally brought sadness into a room. I'm tearing up just thinking about it. I had also endured my fair amount of trauma in the home, so sometimes I felt connected to her, but almost too connected for my personal comfort. I began feeling the sadness she brought with her, and I think I may have gotten an attachment from it. I am of Aboriginal descent, and one day my grandmother decided she wanted to smudge my room because activity had gotten super bad in there, and it was always at least 7 degrees colder than the rest of the home. She immediately felt a coldness in the corner and asked if that's where the little girl had been crying, and she was right. As she was smudging, I started to cry very abruptly and hard. I was nearly sobbing. My grandma had to stop smudging, then told me that the girl most likely had an attachment to me, and I shouldn't have cried because in our culture and beliefs, that means that you are inviting them to stay with you. My grandma died a couple of years later, and I moved out of the house, but I still sometimes feel like she is with me. Story 5. I was raised off-grid on an uninhabited mountain, except for my family. We were the first established homestead on that mountain ever, and first residents since the early 1900s miners left. The log home we built was located about a half a mile down from a deserted mining camp. There is still little published history recording that camp's journey up there, or who mined there. It was in operation roughly 15 years and boasts about 9 cabins. The camp has traded hands many times since I was a child. I used to hike to it and play around the cabins. I remember in the most intact cabin there had been a notebook. I read passages from not only the current owner, but also one of the past owners recounting tales of the little blue girl. Later I had found remnants of an old children's fort built with a 1900s handmade cabin door hung in a mistletoe fir tree for a treehouse. One night, when we all came home, we cleared dirt and built a fresh home, no bones or artifacts. One night, when we all came home one fall evening, as we entered through the mudroom into the house, we all heard a strange noise. We looked at the front door going to the front porch, and the deadbolt was locking and unlocking very fast. It takes some muscle to lock and unlock a deadbolt. It quit. I said, "Mom?" She walked up to the front door, opened it, and there was nothing there. She shut the door. The deadbolt locked and unlocked and remained still. It was just the wind," she said. And it never happened again. Years later in my 20s, I was taking a family friend for a horseback ride. We walked along, enjoying the early spring day and the horses, chatting about whatever came to mind. Suddenly, about 40 yards off, we heard a little girl laugh loudly. My friend smiled and said, "Oh, you have children up here?" I shook my head and replied, "No, we don't. There isn't another soul for a few miles. No children until, well, after that." She seemed to turn a bit pale, then asked, "Well, what was that?" I sat quiet. I thought I knew what it was, that I had had my first encounter with the little blue girl. But not wanting to spook my friend or sound crazy, I just said, I don't know." We continued our ride and had no issue. One more weird thing about my mountain is not very often, but out of the blue, I've experienced this really awful feeling. Like something evil is close. I was having a chat with an older gentleman who is an avid outdoorsman, an overall tough guy who owns property up there, and we started talking about strange happenings up there. I asked him about the evil feeling, thinking he'd laugh at me and poke fun, but to my surprise, he got dead serious. He recounted a time he was in his cabin, and in his words, he ain't scared of shit. All of a sudden, he said, it was like the darkness outside got even darker, and he became terrified. He said the hairs on his arms stood up, and he had half a mind to get in his truck and leave. He admitted he had never felt like that before and was glad I had said something because he thought maybe something was wrong with him. He mentioned it had lasted about 10 to 15 minutes, but felt like an eternity. We have no clue what that is. Story 6. When I was in basic training for the Army, we stayed in some pretty outdated barracks. Throughout our training, people started noticing weird things within the second week. We had lights in our latrine that had a motion sensor, so whenever you would walk in, the lights would cut on and turn off after about 10 minutes or so. During fire guard, for those that don't know, it's basically where a few people will stay awake during select hours throughout the night to clean and lend to basic administrative actions, such as picking up a phone, etc. Some people would go in the bathroom to clean and then wait the rest of their shift in front of the sinks, chatting and whatnot, but the lights would randomly cut on without anyone entering or triggering it. Then, as days go by, we had this guy, let's call him Jack. Jack was presumably a son of a medium. I end up going to bed as soon as I can, and I wake up about an hour after and get up to use the latrine. I come back to my bunk, and I notice him sitting straight up, looking at a locker, and talking and laughing at absolutely nothing. I shrug it off as this dude is weird and crazy. I notice him talking and laughing randomly as days go by, and I confront him. He asked me if I believed in ghosts and spirits. I replied yes, and he informed me about his connection to the afterlife. He told me that he had been talking to this spirit and how she was lonely, and gave him a list of rules on what to do and not do throughout basic training. I was kind of just thinking whatever until he told me that she said that these were her barracks and that she died from a freak accident there. He even described what she was wearing, and I later looked it up when we could get our phones, and it was an old Army uniform. Jack then told me that she is friendly, but likes to play games with us as it's funny to her. Meanwhile, I'm stretched out, and then word starts spreading that we have a ghost in our barracks. So for the next few weeks, most of us are paranoid as hell while doing fire guard. One morning we go and toe the line. Everyone lines up around the middle of the floor waiting for the drill sergeants to come in and inspect our bay for general cleaning of everything. And after 2 minutes, we hear loud crashing and banging coming from inside the latrine around the corner of where our janitor's closet was located. Everyone instantly turns pale, freaking out and paranoid about Jack's spirit friend. Eventually, no one wants to step foot inside, so I go in to inspect and make sure everything is in order before our drill sergeant sees and smokes us for it. So my platoon guide follows in after me. Upon entering, I see that almost every item from the janitor's closet was thrown into the bathroom stall across from it. Mops, brooms, jugs of chemicals, brushes, you name it. I figured that there was no way everything just happened to fall 5 feet into that stall, as everything is in a designated spot, straight and orderly. I walked back out with my platoon guide, and we didn't say a word, but everyone could see the looks on our faces. Later on, no one wanted to go into the latrine. That night, I go ask Jack if that was his friend's doing, and he just said she thought it was the funniest thing ever. Later, throughout the end of our training, everything was seemingly normal. I asked Jack if he still talks to his friend, and he said that she hasn't been coming around as much and got bored of us. Towards the end of our training, our drill sergeant informed us that our barracks used to be female-only barracks,